Hello, everybody. It's Adrian with Prep Agent, and I want to welcome you to today's webinar on finance. Real estate finance is what we're going to be talking about today. Yay! Hope everybody's as excited as I am. Let me know if you can hear me. Oh, looks like Deja says, hey. So that means y'all can hear me. Hope everybody's having a good morning if you're on the West Coast, a good afternoon if you're on the East Coast. Mostly, hope you're ready to do a little studying of everybody's favorite topic, finance. Why is it everybody's favorite? Because it's money, right? Money is what makes this industry go round. So we'll be talking about some of that today while everybody's getting settled in and logged on and sharing their good mornings. Let me know if anybody studied your 5 words of the day. For anybody who's new to these webinars, Joe has a standing recommendation that everybody study 5 words, 5 vocabulary words per day. It's kind of like a challenge, right? And the idea is that you choose 5 words before you go to bed at night, and then the next morning you sort of study those words first thing. Like you can usually often do this within 5 to 10 minutes, and you just wake up, study your 5 words, and then let your brain sort of revisit those throughout the day. Because as you do that, you are learning. And by the end of the day, oftentimes you will know those words like the back of your hand, whatever that means. I don't even know if anybody says that anymore. I don't look at the back of my hands very often, but apparently it's something you should know. Oh, I want to give a quick shout out to Martha for passing the exam yesterday. Congratulations. Me and Joe give you our welcomes. You're welcome. Does that really work? Can you say that? I don't know. We're happy that we could help. How about that? Martha, we're really happy that we're able to help you, and our goal is to help the other 157 people on this webinar right now as well. So welcome, Soka. Let's look at some of the words that people were studying. Jenna did novation, marginal tax rate, release clause, sale leaseback, assessment. A lot of difficult stuff in there. Richard had net listing, exclusive agency, open listing, right to sell, exclusive listing, and watch the video on listings. That's a nice one. I like how he grouped everything together there, basically trying to learn all of the listings or the main listings and the differences between those. Angel, or Angel, depending on where you're from, studied TILA, Reg Z, TRID, and RESPA. That is awesome. That is actually exactly where I wanted to start this morning. So if everybody is comfortable, y'all got your coffee, then let's get started with TILA. What is the purpose of TILA? Kevin asks, can anybody explain what estoppel means? It doesn't have to do with finance, Kevin. Usually we try and stick to the topic of the day. But I'll tell you real quickly that the concept of estoppel just means that you can't go back on something that you previously said, or you can't go back on a position that you previously held. So one example would be, say you sign a lease to move into a new place and the owner tells you, like, hey, we're going to replace these windows, like probably won't happen till after you move in, but we're going to replace these windows. We know they look kind of crappy. And you're like, okay, based on that, I'm going to sign this lease. Well, if the landlord then comes back and says like, hey, actually, I was just kidding about that. We can't afford to replace the windows. You can potentially, well, you can take the landlord to court on the idea that he can't go back on what he previously said. He sort of promised you one thing. So I forget exactly which, that's obviously not agency by estoppel, but there is a version of the concept of estoppel that you can use to pursue action against the landlord in a case like that. Does that make sense to everybody? No worries, Kevin. I hope I explained that well enough to cover your questions. And I just want to look at what everybody says about truth in lending. So TILA talks about APR, right? As Christine says, the point of TILA is to express to the borrower the true cost of the credit. And one of the main ways they do that is through the APR. The APR is the number that sort of bundles all of the finance charges that have to do with borrowing anyway, not necessarily bank fees or loan fees or whatever, but all the actual finance charges for borrowing the money is included in APR. So that covers truth in lending. That's about getting the credit. What about the ECOA? The ECOA, just a little hint, it's up on the board. The question on the board talks about the ECOA, but what's the point of the ECOA? What does the ECOA do? What does the Equal Credit Opportunity Act do for people? As Nora says, no discrimination. It outlaws discrimination in regards to getting credit, right? So, I like the way KP says it. Prohibits discrimination in lending. Very easy, simple, forward, keyword type definition there. Prohibits or prevents discrimination in lending. All right, and what about, so both of those, right, TILA and ECOA, those come when you are trying to, like you deal with those more when you're trying to get credit as a borrower. What about when you're settling? So what does RESPA do? What's the point of RESPA? Something else that we talk about with finance because it has to do with closing your sale transaction. So we've got TILA, which is about disclosure of credit terms, right? TILA requires the lender to disclose everything about the costs of borrowing credit. And then we have the ECOA, which is about prohibiting discrimination in lending. So we've got one rule to make sure that the lender is being upfront with you about the cost. We've got one rule that says you cannot discriminate against people who are trying to get credit. So RESPA, um, as Tina says, prohibits kickbacks. As Nora Katz says, talks about the total closing costs. And so with RESPA, you're going to get like sort of a layout of what all of the closing costs are, right? There are disclosures involved, but basically the main point of RESPA is to prevent kickbacks. Number one, to make, well, I'll ask you guys, what does preventing kickbacks do? Kevin asked that as well. So what why are kickbacks dangerous? Why do we need an entire law outlining kickbacks? How are kickbacks not a good thing for the borrower? What do you think? So as Nora Estrada says, it protects the customer, but why are kickbacks a bad thing? So RESPA prohibits kickbacks, but as MD says, they can't get money for referring somebody. So basically, the reason that kickbacks are bad is because you could have somebody say, hey, I can give you a great deal on uh, I'll give you a great deal on my commission rate here, but I want you to use this lender over here. They're a great lender. They're awesome. They're going to take care of all of your needs. Well, if you don't know that that agent is getting, or that broker is getting like a $2,000 kickback from the lender on the back end, then you could end up going with a lender who doesn't have your best interests at heart, right? As a borrower, they're more concerned with the broker that gave them the referral, and the broker is referring them because the broker gets $2,000, not because they're going to necessarily look out for your best interest, right? So the whole point of RESPA is to make sure that during the settlement process, the borrower's best interests are being looked at, right? So kickbacks or referrals, and RESPA is mostly there to prevent that, but then also to make sure that as a borrower, you understand what the closing process looks like and what all the closing costs are. So one more thing to cover with all of this. What about TRID? What is TRID? Let me scan the chat real quick. Thomasina asks discount points. We are going to talk about discount points a little bit later. So we will address that in a bit. Gregorio says, what if they disclose that they are getting a referral payment? Is it still illegal? If it is regulated by RESPA, then it is illegal. There is no, to my knowledge, there are no allowances in RESPA for things that RESPA regulates. Now, keep in mind that RESPA is mostly residential, right? So it's not going to cover all sorts of property purchases. You may do lots of transactions in your time practicing that have, that aren't covered by RESPA. But if it's covered by RESPA, it's covered by RESPA, and kickbacks are not allowed. That being said, some states do allow certain referral fees, but kickbacks are pretty clearly defined by the RESPA law. So if you're not sure about what RESPA covers, I'd recommend just Googling RESPA. Go to I forget the name of it, the finance website that the government puts out that gives you all of that information, but it's out there. It's the CFPB, I think, does all of that stuff. Consumer Finance Protection Bureau. Sound right? So that's RESPA and TILA. And then what I asked you before, launching into all of that, was TRID. What is TRID? Somebody put it up here, but Deborah says that TRID is a combo of RESPA and TRILO. RESPA and TILA, excuse me. RESPA, TILA, TRID. Whew. Lots of tongue twisting going on there, right? So as Angel says, TRID is TILA RESPA integrated. TRID actually stands for the TILA RESPA integrated disclosure. And what that does is basically says that when you start the home loan process, you're going to get one document that tells you what your sort of APR looks like and what your upfront costs should be. It's called a loan estimate, right? When you're going to close, you're going to get one document that has to do with closing. I believe it's called a closing disclosure, right? The CD. Before all of this, before TRID came about in 2015, if you were getting a home loan, you would have potentially 3 or 4 documents up front trying to sort of disclose to you what your upfront costs of borrowing the credit are going to be, right? Costs of obtaining the credit, which just made it confusing. The whole point of TILA and RESPA are to simplify the home loan process. So what happened is that the process was basically getting so convoluted that people were starting to get confused again. So the government came in and said, okay, we're going to implement TRID, and that's going to simplify the disclosures that people get. Now you're going to get one loan estimate up front when you start the process. You're going to get one closing disclosure at the end when you're about to close the process. And that's what TRID does. So all of that being said, let's jump into the question on the board. Under the Equal Credit Opportunity Act, lenders may not discriminate against a borrower by refusing to offer a loan based on A, an insufficient down payment, B, an applicant's credit history, D, the gender of an applicant, or excuse me, that was C. C, the gender of an applicant, or D, the poor condition of the property. What do you all think here? David asks, how would that differ with tie-in agreements, which are prohibited by Sherman antitrust laws? That's a great question. The example that I used there could potentially, based on the requirements of, like, I have some ideas about how that's different, but there are definitely a lot of similarities there. So that's a great point. That could also, a situation like the one that I presented where the broker is requiring that, or in order to get a discount, the broker is requiring that you use their lender. That could very well be covered under, as a tie-in under antitrust as well. Totally. That's a great point. Well, back to the question on the board. Under the Equal Credit Opportunity Act, lenders may not discriminate against a borrower by refusing to offer a loan based on C, the gender of an applicant. So an insufficient down payment or an applicant's credit history, those are all normal reasons for refusing credit to somebody. And the poor condition of a property is a perfectly legit reason to refuse to extend a home loan if you don't think you, as a lender, if you don't think that you can sell the home for the amount of the loan, right? Oh, congratulations to PRST space Vlog. I have no idea what that means, but you passed the exam, so you are most welcome. Really glad we could help there. Mad congrats to PRST, Perst. All right, next question on the board. When the amortized payment of a mortgage remains constant over the period of the loan, but leaves an outstanding balance to be paid at the end, this payment is called A, an escalation payment, B, an acceleration payment, C, a balloon payment, or D, a satisfaction payment. What does everybody think? What do you all think here? Amortized payments of a mortgage remain constant. So when the amortized payment of a mortgage remains constant over the period of the loan, leaves an outstanding balance to be paid at the end, this is called a balloon payment. And as our explanation sort of dives into, balloon payments can be a creative way to allow a buyer to get into a property right away, but then refinance a little bit down the road with better terms than maybe they qualify for now. That's why we like balloon payments. And balloons are happy, right? Probably the one thing I miss about state fairs. I haven't been to a state fair or a carnival in ages, but balloons and cotton candy, there's just something about those. I must have had a good experience with the balloon as a child. And then also those little like water whistles that are shaped like birds. You put water in them and then blow through and they sound like a chirping bird. Cheapest, piecest of crap item you could get to bring joy to your face. And maybe a fidget spinner too, right? Clarabelle asks, what is a satisfaction payment? I don't know that a satisfaction payment is a real thing. Sometimes on the exam, let me take a look. Yeah, I don't see satisfaction payment being a real thing. But sometimes on the exam, what they'll do is exactly what we did in that last question, um, which is that they'll put something that sounds like it could be a real thing, but then it's not a real thing, to try and confuse you. So if that's why Joe says, if you've never heard of it before, like satisfaction payment, don't choose it, even if it sounds like it could be the thing, right? All right. So in a repayment of a mortgage loan, which type of interest is used? That is B, simple. Sorry, I don't think I read this question ahead of time because I got distracted by cotton candy and balloons. My bad. But when you're repaying a mortgage loan, and it looks like most of y'all got this right anyway, we deal with simple interest, right? And what simple interest means is that the interest is assessed on the principal. That's it. The interest doesn't get added or subtracted as you go. The interest is just assessed on the principal at each time that there's a assessment date, whatever that's called. I did see that a few people threw compound up there, maybe being a little bit confused with what happens with the savings account. So what happens with compound interest, that's when, say, with some sort of a savings account, for example, let's say you have a savings account with 1% interest and you put $1,000 in that savings account. After your earning period, which say, I think a lot of accounts will do that quarterly. So after 3 months, you earn 1% of that $1,000, which is what, $10, right? So you earn your $10 interest. So what compound interest means is that they're going to add that $10 to your $1,000 principal. So now you have $1,010 of principal, and the new interest will be calculated based on the new principal. That's compound. Simple means that the interest never gets added or subtracted from the principal. It's just calculated based on the existing principal at the time. As Kevin says, compounding is good for investing. Compound is not good for borrowing. Simple is good for borrowing. That makes sense to everybody? Kevin asked, what flavor cotton candy? Blue. I think blue was my favorite. I have no idea what flavor that was, but blue tastes good. That's all I remember. Next up, when processing a real estate loan application, a lender would correlate the characteristics of a borrower, loan, and property to make A, a property appraisal, B, a credit rating, C, a liability statement, or D, a loan commitment. Kent says blue is raspberry. Cynthia says bubblegum. Raspberry bubblegum sounds delicious right now. And major distraction with raspberry bubblegum, cotton candy. All right, back on track, everybody. Or more appropriately, back on track. Adrian, let's talk about the question on the board. When processing a real estate loan application, a lender would correlate the characteristics of a borrower, loan, and property to make D, a loan commitment, right? So what we're talking about here, when you really break this question down, we're talking about a lender processing a real estate loan application. So when you look at the answers that we have here, the one that jumps out to me initially, the two that jump out to me are a liability statement and a loan commitment. Why is that? Well, I can immediately, I can immediately negate property appraisal because we're looking at more than just the property. We're also looking at the borrower and the loan, right? Um, the next one is credit rating. Who comes up with a credit rating? Does anybody know? What is that called? What is the credit rating even called? Does anybody remember what the credit rating is called? Welcome, Rosanna. Glad to have you on board. So what is a credit rating? So credit rating is also called a FICO score, right? And who comes up with the FICO score? Any idea? Clark Sanchez says the credit bureau, right? So the different credit bureaus determine the different scores, determine your FICO score, right? And that's why there's 3 different bureaus, and each one has a slightly different way of estimating your score, but they all come pretty close to each other because they're all using that FICO score method. So that's why credit rating is not the answer here, right? Because a lender does not create a credit rating. A lender uses your credit rating, but they don't come up with the credit rating. So you have 2 things that it could be, a loan commitment and a liability statement. I have heard of a loan commitment before in relation to getting a loan. A liability statement, not so much. Maybe let's take a quick look at that, right? I feel like a liability statement is more commonly used with insurance, but actually doing a little bit of quick research, a liability statement is just a general legal thing. It's almost like a clause, right? It's just a statement saying that you accept liability for whatever the legal contract is talking about. So loan commitment is what we end up with there. That one is a little bit process of elimination, but hopefully now you'll all remember, right? Next question on the board. What are the rights of a borrower who falls 2 months behind in making his or her trust deed payments? A, he or she has the right of reinstatement. B, he or she has the right of redemption. C, he or she has no rights and will lose the property. Or D, he or she has the right of refinance. And what do you all think here? Matisse says, never heard of a liability statement. I had heard of it, Latisse, but I never looked it up. So it was helpful for me to actually do that quick research and find out that it's just kind of a um, standard legal contract type of situation. Getting back to the question on the board. What are the rights of a borrower who falls 2 months behind in making his or her trust deed payments? The answer is A, he or she has the right of reinstatement. So all of you are not in trust deed states. Many of you are in mortgage states or what we call lien theory states. So if you're in one of those sorts of states, whether or not or what your rights look like regarding late payments are covered by your mortgage agreement, right? Or by your purchase agreement. Sorry, it's not a mortgage agreement, by your purchase agreement. If you're in a trust deed state, you generally have an automatic right of reinstatement. So if you've never heard of that, it could be because you're not in a trust deed state. I'm going to talk to Joe about how applicable this is to a national category because I don't really um, yeah, he'll have better insight on that to me. But hopefully, for those of you that this is applicable to, that makes sense. It does apply in California and several other states, Lise. KP says, "Oh, you're in a trustee state and never heard of it." Then it's a little surprising that that may not have been covered in your pre-license material. But generally speaking, states that use trust deeds have a right of reinstatement, and that's a short period of time in which you can make up your payments after falling behind. It is different than the rights of redemption. So that's the point here, is that I wanted to make sure that nobody confuses the right of reinstatement with the right of redemption. So as Nicolica says, a right of redemption is when your home is actually in foreclosure, right? So depending on your state laws and also whether you're lien theory or title theory, which one of those your state is in, you have potentially an equitable right of redemption and a statutory right of redemption. And those rights basically say that if you defaulted on your payments and foreclosure proceedings have started, you may have the right of getting your property back. You know, it's very difficult to meet the rights of redemption. One of those rights of redemption, I forget which one right now. Oh, thanks. Christine just threw them up. So the equitable right of redemption is before a foreclosure sale. So if you're in a state that has an equitable right of redemption, then you can redeem your property, make up all the payments, and basically get it back to even before the foreclosure sale, but after foreclosure proceedings have started. The statutory right of redemption is something that some states have after the foreclosure sale has been completed. So if you have a statutory right of redemption in your state, once the foreclosure sale has been completed and an investor has put a bid and put an accepted bid on your property, if you're in a state with a statutory right of redemption, you are given an additional amount of time, usually 6 months to a year, to potentially redeem your property. And to do that, you have to pay the investor back all of their fees and basically catch your foreclosure payments up and all of that. But that's the difference between reinstatement and redemption. Reinstatement, what this question talks about, foreclosure has not come into the conversation yet. If we're talking about a right of redemption, foreclosure has come into the conversation, and it's just a matter of where the foreclosure proceedings are, like how far along they are, determines whether you might have an equitable or statutory right of redemption. Nora says, so it's like you're redeeming yourself to get the property back. I think that's a great way of looking at it. Yes, you are redeeming your financial situation and your agreement. You're redeeming yourself in your agreement with the lender to get everything back to status quo, to where it's supposed to be. So that's awesome. I love that. Dream Plus asks, the reinstatement is with you and the lender. Redemption is with foreclosure. So reinstatement is between you and the lender before foreclosure comes into the conversation. Redemption is between you and the lender after foreclosure comes into the conversation. And Tijuana asks, reinstatement is trust deed, redemption is foreclosure. No, no. Trust deeds can have redemption as well. So let's make sure that we don't confuse those. Reinstatement is if you're in a trust deed state and foreclosure proceedings have not started at all, right? So reinstatement is only if you're in a trust deed state and foreclosure proceedings have not started at all. Redemption is either trust deed or mortgage, and foreclosure proceedings have started. We got it? We got it. Everybody's got it. Okay, awesome. Let us scoot right along then. Oh, I'm pretty sure I didn't want to include a trustee sale because, again, that's probably not applicable to everybody. Angel's learning a lot today. Awesome. Glad to hear that. Thanks for sharing that, you too, Proska. It really inspires me to try and explain things even better and more simply and more concise when I know that it's helping you all. So I really appreciate it when you throw that up in the chat. It really helps me know that I'm barking up the right trees with these explanations, right? So let's get into this question because I wanted to make sure we covered this. Somebody asked about discount points earlier. When obtaining a mortgage loan, the buyer often has to pay discount points. These points are a percentage of A, the loan amount, B, the loan amount plus closing costs, C, the selling price of the property, or D, the selling price minus the agent's commission. What do you think here? Thanks for that, Cynthia. Something different every time. That's something I try and do. I don't like to repeat the same stuff over and over. So I try and format my webinars so that I'm covering new stuff and so that we together are covering new stuff. And what's awesome for me is that you all are incredibly smart and challenging me with this stuff all the time too. So we're all getting smarter in these webinars. Love it. So discount points. When obtaining a mortgage loan, the buyer often has to pay discount points. These points are a percentage of A, the loan amount. So how much does a discount point cost? Can anybody tell me what a discount point costs? Awesome, Christine. Glad that this is a good review before the exam, especially because finance is annoying for the most part. A lot of complicated stuff to try and keep our heads wrapped around. Kivani, I'm glad that you appreciate that too. It is a big thing for me to go over the wrong answers too, try and explain why the right answer is the right answer. So, discount points. When you have to buy a discount point, as everybody's throwing up in the chat, that discount point costs you 1% of the loan amount. 1% of the loan amount. So somebody asks earlier, what exactly is a discount point? So a discount point is an option that a lender will often give you. And basically they're saying, hey, if you pay this 1% of the loan amount up front, we're going to knock a little bit off of your APR on the back end. So you're going to pay a little more up front, but you're going to save some money in the long run because your overall your long-term APR is going to be less, right? Matt asks, but they equal 0.125% for the interest rate. That's up to the lender, Matt. I would say that is a standard. That's the standard number I've seen, but it's up to the lender. I mean, if the lender wants to knock off like 8% from your APR for that discount point, they can. They're not required to do anything, to my knowledge. Actually, don't hold me to that. Don't quote me on that. But I do know that that's up to the lender. It doesn't have to be an eighth of a percentage point, which is what 0.125% works out to be. Arlene asked, credit worthiness come into play? Absolutely. Credit worthiness comes into play. And a lot of times, That's one of the reasons why you'll be offered discount points rather than just being given a great deal up front. It's because your loan is potentially higher risk. So the lender says, like, well, if I can get more money from you up front by having you pay this discount point, that's more secure for me in the long run. So I'll give you that discount in the long run. Makes sense. So did we cover all of that for everybody? And the other thing I wanted to make sure is that we understand that because the discount points are only with the lender, that is completely with the lender, that the discount points are only applicable to the loan amount. The lender, they're only applicable to the actual principal balance of the loan amount. Does that make sense to everybody? Hmm. All right, we'll do this one. Mortgages which are not insured by a government agency are called A, conventional mortgages, B, FHA loans, C, FMHA loans, or D, VA loans. Abigail asks, what is the origination point? I'm gonna look that up real quick. I think I know what we mean by that. It looks like an origination point is just another term for a discount point. So origination point is just another way to say discount point. So mortgages which are not insured by a government agency are called A, conventional loans. Let me see if that's something we need to go over. Looks like most of us got that wrong, or right, excuse me. But basically, mortgages which are not covered by FHA or VA or backed by a government agency. Insured is kind of the wrong word there, but mortgages which are not backed by a government agency are what we refer to as conventional loans. And I saw somebody said, Heather said, read that wrong. Easy to do. This type of question format is specifically trying to do that by asking you mortgages which are not insured as opposed to mortgages which are insured. Like most of us, what our brains do is we see mortgages, insured, government agency. And that's not nothing to do with like, oh, if you're a good reader or not. That's just how people's brains works. It's how they like how our brains try and be more efficient, right? They try and get the meaning from something without having to read every last little like fine print detail of it. Well, it's the same thing with sentences. And I've studied this because I'm a writer, right? Like how people comprehend reading is very interesting to me. So it is really important with these exams that you read every word and let it process through, right? Because your brain is going to just try and look at that and get as much meaning from it as it can in as short a period of time as it can, because that's how it uses the least amount of energy, right? Um, which is why these exams do that all the time, throw in these negatives and stuff like that, just to make sure that you're reading carefully. We're going to do one more. Let's talk about when a borrower is obtaining a home loan, which of the following is not true? A promissory note serves as security for the loan. B, a promissory note is a written promise to repay the loan. C, a promissory note or bond must accompany the mortgage before funding can occur. Or D, a promissory note is not required if a borrower puts more than 30% of the purchase price down. So while you all are answering that, I'm just going to scan the chat, see if there's some other questions I can ask. Susan asks, what is FMHA? Not applicable to that question at all, Susan. That's one of those fake answers. It may be something, but it's not applicable to a government-backed loan. Clarabelle asks, difference between points and buy downs. Same thing. A buy down is just another verbiage, another term for a discount point or origination point. My guess is that it's up to the lender what they're going to call all of those. Thanks, Eleni. Much appreciate your kind words. So much heartwarming in this webinar. Y'all make me want to come back time and time again. Last question I'm going to answer. Kevin asks, Adrian, can we find a test that is specific to our state questions? You maybe can, Kevin, send us an email using this contact page on our website. If you go there and click on the More menu and the Contact Us link, there's a form where you can send me an email. I'll need to look at your account specifically to see what's going on with what you're trying to do there with your state-specific practice exam. Okay, back to the question on the board. When a borrower is obtaining a home loan, which of the following is not true? D, a promissory note is not required if a borrower puts more than 30% of the purchase price down. A lender is most likely going to require you to promise that you'll pay them back before they give you a loan, regardless of how much the loan is for. So the amount that a borrower puts down does not affect the amount of a promissory note. And that's going to do it for today, everybody. Thank you so much for today's session. I feel like we all learned a lot, shared a lot of good energy. I know I feel great now, so I hope you all do too. You feel ready to attack that exam. You feel ready to attack the rest of your day. Appreciate all the interaction between you all. I want to wish you all a great rest of your day. I hope you get some sunshine or some good vibes or a little workout, or some blue cotton candy with a red balloon just to pick your day up a little bit. No clowns, though. Clowns and red balloons don't work anymore after the movie It. We got Stu coming tonight. By the way, let's take a quick look at what Stu is doing. Stu has Laws of Agency coming up later today. 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. So if you're around, make sure you hit that. And we'll see you there in the chat. So I hope you all have a great rest of your day. Appreciate y'all. Take care of yourself. Take care of your people. Love one another. And we'll talk soon.